Let's jump into one of history's most studied conflicts, the American Civil War. But we're going to look at it through the eyes of a very, very unexpected observer.
That's right. As America was literally tearing itself apart, Karl Marx was over in London working as a European correspondent for the New York Daily Tribune. And his reporting from across the Atlantic, well, it cut through the noise with a kind of clarity that almost no one else had at the time.
You see, he was looking right through the convenient stories and the official excuses being spun all over Europe. He saw the real economic gears and the historical forces that were grinding away underneath it all. So what was it? What exactly did he see that the powerful London press seemed so determined to ignore?
Okay, let's start with the first major myth Marx had to deal with. The story that was making the rounds in Britain was that this war, it had nothing to do with slavery. Nope, it was just a simple squabble over trade policy.
The London papers were painting this picture of a free trading South bravely fighting against a protectionist North and its tariffs. But Marx just demolishes this argument with straight-up facts. He points out that actually America had a free trade system for the 15 years right before the war. And that big protectionist moral tariff they were all talking about, it was only passed after the South had already started leaving the Union. The tariff wasn't the cause of the war, it was a consequence of it.
And you can just hear the sarcasm in his writing here. Marx points out that this great discovery of a tariff war wasn't made in Charleston, the heart of the Confederacy. It was dreamed up in the newsrooms of London, thousands of miles away. It was a story built for export.
So, all right, if the tariff argument was just a big smokescreen, what was the real engine driving this whole thing? Well, for Marx, the answer was crystal clear, even if the London press was trying its best not to see it.
And this was the even bigger story they were selling, that slavery had nothing to do with any of it. The British narrative was painting the North as these aggressive bullies, just fighting for power, while totally ignoring the one institution at the very core of the Southern economy and its entire way of life.
Now, to counter this, Marx did something kind of brilliant. He didn't even have to use his own words. He just let the secessionists speak for themselves. This is Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, flat out declaring that their new government was built, for the first time in history, on the idea of slavery as a positive good. That's not a Northern accusation, that's a Southern declaration of purpose.
Marx also argued that this wasn't some sudden snap. He saw the war as the logical conclusion to decades of the slave states demanding more and more power. You can just trace it right down the line. From the Missouri Compromise to the Dred Scott decision, every single step was another push to expand the power of slavery. So when Lincoln was elected on a platform of just stopping that expansion, well, that was the final trigger.
Now, let's see how these two competing stories collided in a real, high-stakes international crisis. The Trent Affair nearly dragged Britain right into the war, and Marx's analysis just cuts through all the political drama right to the legal facts.
So here are the basics. A Union captain stops a neutral British ship, the Trent, and arrests two Confederate diplomats. These guys, Mason and Slidell, were on their way to Europe to try and get Britain and France to officially recognize the Confederacy. The reaction back in Britain was, well, it was explosive. The press went into an absolute frenzy. We're talking cries of outrage, even literal calls to bombard New York. It was a full-blown war fever, fueled by this perceived insult to the British flag and, let's be honest, by cotton brokers who were terrified of the Union blockade.
But Marx, as usual, just looks past all the shouting and examines the law. And it all comes down to this one key word: contraband. You see, Britain's own proclamation of neutrality clearly stated that enemy officers and dispatches were considered contraband, and that meant they were fair game, even if they were on a neutral ship.
So you had these two totally different stories being told. The British press was screaming about an illegal kidnapping, but Marx, citing British law, just calmly points out that these diplomats were clearly officers of an enemy power carrying hostile information. They were, by definition, contraband. And then he delivers this brilliant final twist. The U.S. captain's only legal mistake was that he didn't seize the entire ship as a prize, which he was allowed to do.
By only taking the men, he'd made a mistake that actually helped the British.
And this quote just captures the mood perfectly. Marx describes this meeting of Liverpool cotton merchants as a senseless rigmarole. When one guy tried to argue for peace and following the law, the crowd just shouted, "Collar him, throw him out." This wasn't about law, this was about money, and national pride whipped into a frenzy.
So, why does any of this matter? Why are we digging into these arguments from over 150 years ago? Because for Marx, the Civil War was never just some American problem. He saw it as a conflict that would change the entire world.
And this really gets to the heart of it. For Marx, the London press wasn't just getting the story wrong by accident. He believed they were deliberately muddying the waters. They were hiding the fact that this was a monumental struggle between a society built on slave labor and one built on free labor, and the outcome was going to shape the future for working people everywhere.
And he saw that the moment of truth was getting closer every day. He quotes this American newspaper, The World, because it just perfectly summarized the stark reality of the situation. The war had reached a point where there was no more middle ground. It was either the Union or slavery. One of them had to go.
Ultimately, Marx's analysis is this powerful reminder to always look beneath the surface of the official stories we're told. It really challenges us to ask, when we hear about today's conflicts, are we getting the full picture? Or are there deeper economic and historical forces at play that, just like in 1861, are being conveniently left out of the conversation?